a mistake was made, at what point did they realize a mistake had been made?
Well, that's Senator Larry Grooms with maybe the understatement of 2025 so far. Here we are, a week after we were discussing that $1.8 billion that the mistake was made on. And still, we're really not much closer to an answer here on this yet another Sunday in South Carolina. We're going to try to get to the bottom of this, but a 3-hour hearing just a few days ago didn't do that, so there will be more. So we're going to get you connected to the Capitol again with our friends, Catherine Foster and, of course, Dave Wilson. We were talking about this a week ago. Here we are again after another lengthy hearing where we brought in the auditors that looked into the
$3 million.
The $3 million paycheck auditors.
That we paid to check and say, where is our monopoly money here?
Yes. They have a lot of data. They have a lot of information. They are the ones who determined that the money never really existed that we thought we had in our state bank accounts. And Larry Grooms, again, he had a lot of questions. He's been the driving force for months on this fiasco, for lack of a better term. But where do we go now? We still don't know what's happening here, I don't think.
At least we're starting to get some answers finally, and that's what that $3 million bought us.
Real money.
Real money.
Not monopoly money like the $1.8 billion.
True, but at this point, a small price to pay to start to figure out where the breakdown was in the system. So we know now how it happened, basically. You know, we're changing financial systems. We thought it would kind of come out in the wash, and then it didn't. We just pretended that if we buried our head in the sand, that it would all resolve itself, and it didn't happen. And so now we're having these hearings to try to figure out why we're here.
Well, and the other part about it is when you take a look at the fact that the state back in 2007 and 8 were switching over from one accounting system to another, and the banks switch over at the same time. They really thought that this was going to boil down to, okay, once everything's moved over, because keep in mind, there are hundreds of bank accounts and different accounts where money is set aside for different departments, different agencies. And so as that money was transferred over from one to another, they recognized, okay, the number here doesn't match up. So we'll just say that there's an amount of money that's missing. We're not quite sure, and eventually it'll all come out. And it didn't. And so this has been going on as the auditors went back to 2015 and said, okay, we're going to anchor to this point, 10 years back, and we know the books were good here. And as they watched the system transfer over, they began to go, wait a minute, here's where we're beginning to see this. But the reality, Brian, is somebody should have been doing that same type of work in state government for the last 10 years. Because when it first came out, somebody said, well, maybe it's close to 3.5 billion. And they said it's actually like 1.8. The hard part of this, though, is what the treasurer did when he was testifying, saying that we've actually made somewhere close to $200 million in interest. It was
218 or $220 million, I think.
So how do you make $218 million in interest
on something that doesn't exist?
Exactly.
I wish I could do that.
That would be really nice.
That'd be amazing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I think when we talked about this last week, Representative Heather Bauer from Richland County basically said, listen, we're going to impeach the attorney, then we're going to impeach the treasurer here because somewhere along the way, somebody didn't do what their job was.
Do you expect action on that this coming week? Because again, last week, the session was off. They were on break because of the inauguration. Do we expect maybe some steps to be taken in that direction this week, do you think?
The House is going to be supposed to be meeting on this. Senate Finance has been meeting on this. Will a Republican Speaker of the House allow a Republican treasurer to actually be impeached? I think they should go ahead and go through the process if the questions are not answered. If the questions even are answered and it points back to that office, something's going to have to be done.
And in this situation, Republican, Democrat, it doesn't matter. Excuse me. And this is a situation where with the treasurer, it's almost a dog ate my homework excuse. And if you're parents out there, and if your kid came and said, the dog ate my homework, so I couldn't turn it in, that's why my grade has failed. you wouldn't accept that. You would say, no, get back in your room and do your homework. And that's what we haven't seen here. We're letting the treasurer get away with, essentially lying, it seems, or certainly a gross mistake of a statement to say that money was actually invested. We cannot lose track of $1.8 billion. That's a little more important than the math homework, and yet it goes back to the same thing. It's back to the same calculator or abacus. It's just a question of how are we going to actually make sure that it happens.
Yeah, we got, not only go back to your room and do your homework, but we don't even have a dog, right?
Right, exactly.
That's another mystery. We have
Yes.
one more question from Senator Larry Grooms that I want to hear, because it's about when should someone have rang the alarm bell? Who should have been told? Who should have known? And there is an answer provided by the auditors.
Yeah.
If we can play that soundbite real quick from that hearing.
In any stretch of the imagination, would that not be of pertinent value to the General Assembly to know that there's $1.8 billion in unreconciled errors in the state's accounting system?
I can't see how that would not be pertinent, but I also don't want to put myself in their shoes, but I understand the premise of your question.
And I understand why you would not want to be in their shoes.
Want to be in those shoes either,
No,
because
that's one of the accountants that was in charge. It had nothing to do with the fiasco, just had to
Right.
make some sense out of it. Gives a pretty decent answer. I don't need to be a high-level accountant to answer that question, but
Yes.
he gave one.
We all should have
Yeah.
known, and we didn't. That's the problem. So we've seen one resignation over this. I expect we're going to end up seeing more.
I think when Richard Ekstrom resigned from office as the Comptroller General, that was a telltale sign that something was going
Something
on.
was wrong.
And Senator Larry Grooms out of Berkeley County there has been bird dogging this issue.
He sure has for 6 or 8 months.
It
Really
has been,
hard.
well, it went all the
I
way
know.
back to when Ekstrom.
With the double counting.
Right, because there's a point in there where the government oversight of what goes on, and to Senator Grooms' point, this is a place where at what point should the General Assembly have known that there's an accounting error that's going on, especially when you can go back and look at this and recognize they could go back 10 years, find a place to anchor from and go, okay, it's spotted here. If that's been going on, then somebody in the General Assembly needed to have known that. There are 170 members of the General Assembly. There's 46 members of the Senate. And Larry Grooms right now is definitely taking the lead on this, saying somebody has to answer for this.
Someone's got to stand up.
Right.
Well, we're going to shift our attention to the nation's capital now, the inauguration of the 47th president, Donald Trump. And going to look at some of the, as we look at some of the video of him taking the oath of office there last week. A lot, of course, of South Carolina's delegation was there and present. The governor, the attorney general, of course, our senators and our members of Congress up there as well. As we have this first week now in office where a lot of things happened. A lot of things happened for sure.
First 24 hours.
How does it all trickle down right here to the Palmetto State? Because there was just a flurry of orders being signed. We have some video of that as well, of that first night. There it is. Just give me the pen and let's go.
They went to the Capitol
One Arena.
there in Washington, D.C., and he's basically in front of the crowd.
In a basketball arena.
In a basketball arena, let's start pulling out these executive orders and showing this is what we're going to do on day one. There it is. Let me lift it up. Let me show you that I signed it. Let's go on to the next one. One of the biggest ones, and this was a point at which he said immigration is an issue, whether you would call it illegal immigration, undocumented workers, whatever the phrase is that you want to use. He basically turned around and said right there, our border guards, for lack of a better phrase, ICE is the acronym for them. They are going after and they're going to find people who are in the country undocumented, and we're going to be deporting them.
Yes.
That is a huge issue, especially in South Carolina, especially with the migrant community that's here. Our farms are very much reliant upon the migrant population to be able to provide for the labor that gets our agriculture products out of the ground and to the supermarket.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that point up, because some people sitting and watching right now will say, well, that's the southern border. We're 1,000 miles away from that. What does that mean to me? Well, I think you just touched on some of that.
And keep in mind, an executive order is an designation by the president directing the agencies that he is the administrator over, because remember, it's the executive branch. So they execute the laws that are out there. And so it's the directive to how he, as the president, wants those things to be implemented. And so you saw the same thing. You saw this with immigration. You saw this with diversity, equity, and inclusion, the DEI. If you've heard that an acronym before, that is the place where they're working on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And President Trump basically said, if there's a DEI office in any state, any federal agency, those people were immediately put on paid leave and told, be prepared to be laid off because you're not going to be doing, because we're closing those offices altogether. So there's a place right there where, as President of the United States, he can say, this is how I want the agencies to be run. And you see it happening almost immediately as soon as he takes office.
Yeah.
There's also a deeper conversation to be had here, because it seems like we have gone so far in one direction on executive orders. We have a three-pronged government for a reason.
For a reason, yeah.
Yes, and so while it can be very difficult, very laborious to get laws through Congress, understand, sometimes we've seen laws take decades to pass if they ever get through. If you remember, I'm Just a Bill.
I
from
do.
Schoolhouse
Schoolhouse
Rock.
Rock.
Yeah.
50 years old now.
Yeah,
51 maybe.
I grew up with it. I think we probably all did. But there's a reason why it takes through that process to get a bill through and passed into being a law. And now we have a system where presidents are just signing dozens of executive orders day one. There is a place for that. They have that authority to direct the agencies, but it's out of control at this point.
How about the chief executive in our state here in South Carolina, Governor Henry McMaster? He'll be delivering the State of the State address here in just a couple of days.
Right.
He certainly has a lot on his plate to deal with himself here as he inches closer to the end of what will be his final term in office. What are we expecting to hear from him in that usually about hour-long address?
I think you're going to see the governor really push forward on what's being done on economic development, for one.
That's
he
a
is
big one.
always about jobs. It's about people, the people, the people. If you've ever heard him speak, that's a phrase that he uses all the time. But I think we're going to talk about jobs. We're going to talk about economic development. We're going to have to talk about the investment that's in the state. I think he'll begin to touch maybe on some of the energy issues that are going on, because the companies that are getting recruited into the state are the ones that are becoming pretty heavy energy producers. So there are places where he's going to have to start addressing those issues and his priorities.
And I would expect him to call pretty strongly for energy development, so that all of his effort and his economic development can really plant roots and flourish in the years to come.
Yeah. There's a lot on the plate for sure.
Exactly.
We want to end with, I guess, a fond farewell
Yes.
to a long-time lawmaker. We have some video from the Senate chamber just the other day. The outgoing, well, he is out. He's gone now. But the session has begun. Nikki Setzler,
Right.
Lexington County, served decades. If we could just see some of that video here of the portrait that was unveiled. It was Wednesday afternoon of Nikki Setzler.
I will say this.
Did some good work there.
He served in the South Carolina Senate for 48 years.
Amazing.
Keep in mind, that was
Absolutely
1976 when he
Yeah.
went into office. He is the longest serving state senator in American history and has served Lexington County, that whole community there in the West Columbia, Casey, for a long time, and went all the way down into Aiken. He's been serving that community for almost 5 decades and has such a level of rapport and respect within the Senate chambers. I mean, it's just a fantastic example of this is what a servant of the people looks like. And to Nikki Setzler, who I will call a friend, congratulations on 48 fantastic years of serving. And it is a great honor to see his portrait that will now be up in the balcony there in the South Carolina Senate.
He was never hard to find. If you had a question, you could find him. All of us could.
Yep.
We do want to hear from him. We have a soundbite from him. He gave about a 10-minute address after they unveiled his portrait. We just got a quick clip of it here.
Whether it's law partner, friend, constituent, whatever, campaign worker, all of you, each one of you here are special. You've made this journey a real joy.
Well, as you noted, Nikki Setzler, also a special guy.
Yeah.
For giving so much for so long.
And I wonder sometimes how his wife Ada Jane is when all her birthday came up and the legislature was getting ready
Every
to go
family member
in,
was thanked today.
And you
I
were
can
sitting there
assure you.
going,
They were thanked
she's
during
sitting there
that
going,
speech.
don't you have something to do now on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday? But a man of great service, great family, and a real stalwart of political service in this state. He deserves that recognition.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. Well, that's going to do it this week for Connect to the Capitol. We jammed a lot in there to about 15 or 20 minutes or so. But now with the session back in full gear this week, expect so much more in just a few days, in a week's time, from us here on Connect to the Capitol. Have a good week.